So, I think, to be honest, it's worth talking about how we got here. How we have ended up with the most right-wing government in our nation's history. How did we get here? What the hell happened? You know, I think it's a question that is very easy to answer. But, you know, feel free to, you know, disagree with me as always. But I think this starts literally with the referendum and the day after. So there is no denying the only reason the referendum was called in the first place was to deal with, ironically, the people who are in power. And that is, of course, the people in the ERG and the people in the Conservatives who disagreed with the Europe, who have a very libertarian stance on Europe and regulations, basically meaning they want no regulations at all. And this is more and more coming to pass. We've already talked about his new Brexit secretary basically not wanting to continue Theresa May's guarantee to protect workers' rights and to be able to continue with them, to match them in Europe. So we can say at least goodbye for the immediate future of any further advancement on workers' rights. But we know that the Tories aren't going to do anything about workers' rights because they've done nothing about one of the biggest sources of pain to the working class in the UK, and that has been 0-hour contracts. So, but anyway, back to where we were. So you had the referendum called to essentially rein in these elements of the Tory party, to essentially give David Cameron full control over the Conservative Party, at least for the next decade or so. Because as we've seen in the past, it's been illustrated very well, when the Conservative Party is one and is not split, it is very strong. And make no mistake, what Johnson has done, we'll get onto it, has split the party again. You get very, very obvious. Cameron knew he couldn't stay. Not only because he probably knew he couldn't deliver Brexit, but also because, regardless, he called this referendum to deal with these rogues and rebels. So he knew, regardless, at every turn from that point on, he would be dogged by them. So I think he felt, in a way, that he had to go. There was no other option for him. Even if he did lose the referendum, certainly did play a part in, you know, he had to go because there was no way these people would have let him stay. The same thing would have happened with, you know, Theresa May. They would have gone. So obviously, what happens next? Well, you obviously have to reach back into the referendum. Leave and the unofficial Leave campaign pretty much ran their campaign on, we will not trigger Article 50 until we have negotiated a deal. That was their stance. But of course, what happened? Theresa May immediately, first day, faced an immediate threat from these people. Trigger Article 50, or we walk across the floor to UKIP. It's a very, and was, and always had been, a very credible threat. It's the exact same threat that they'd been threatening for all these years. Whether they'd actually done it, of course, we don't know. But obviously, given that the referendum had happened, that threat could be taken, shall we say, more seriously than it certainly had been in the past. So you have a very, very worried Theresa May basically deciding, I've got to trigger Article 50 to stop essentially this mass defection of sorts. So she had literally no choice but to pull the trigger on Article 50, which really puts us a lot in this situation we are in today on Brexit. And of course, you had her spend, 6 months not really coming up with a solid, concrete Brexit plan, but trying to placate both factions in her party, the moderates and the hardliners, basically saying, look, the moderates were always like, look, we want to remain in the European, customs union, the single market. We know how valuable it is to be in it as part of the UK. And then obviously you have the hardliners who are like, no, we want to leave, because if we leave, we can do so much. And this is where you see they really start to ramp up. And then, of course, you had Chequers. So during that time, obviously, Theresa May was playing peacemaker, promising things to both sides. Out comes Chequers. And what happens? Johnson leaves, Grove leaves, the man who negotiated the deal leaves. What is, Theresa May to do? As she said consistently, this is the best deal you can get. And it really was. And any Brexiteer who thinks that somehow Johnson is going to negotiate a better deal, you're living in complete fantasy land, because you've got to pay attention to what the EU has been saying since day one. The EU has not split as many Brexiteers predicted it would, and has remained strong on this. So nothing is going to change with Johnson demanding the removal of the backstop. And of course it was the backstop that has been the bane in Theresa May's life. Because obviously you've got to wind back further. And of course she called a general election in which she lost her majority. And then she had to rely on the DUP, who are themselves very hard right nationalists who pretty much fall in line, lock, step and barrel almost. If they were in the Conservative Party, they would certainly be with the ERG and the hardliners on this. So obviously she's lost a majority, and now she has to rely even more on these hardliners to try and placate them, but obviously she can't, because her deal was specifically done trying to placate these two people. But obviously she has no majority. She tried as best she could to try and get Labour MPs on board, but none of them migrated in certainly enough significant numbers to pass the deal. It obviously had the biggest parliamentary defeat in history, at least 3 times, even though more MPs did start to say, well, we have to vote for it. And then of course there was no reach across the aisle done to try not to reach out just to Labour, but to reach out to Remainers in Parliament to go, we have to do a deal. We have to be the adults in the room and do it, because if all the remaining MPs had gotten together and had gone, right, we're just going to sideline all these idiot Brexiteers and hardliners, they could have actually done something. But of course, it wasn't to be. And of course, as such things, with the first killing, the ERG smelt blood in the water, and immediately you got rumours about they were going to try and replace her. A no confidence vote did materialise, and she just survived. But of course, how can she survive when a flagship policy is literally being defeated at every turn? She can't do it. So of course she had to go. There was literally no option for her. And of course this led to them seizing their moment. Now, I have talked about in the past that Theresa May was nothing more than a patsy. She was going to be everything that the Brexiteers, everything that went wrong with Brexit, they could blame on Theresa May. But they saw a big problem. First of all, it's not going to... There is no lie, in 2 years' time there will be a general election, regardless. So they were worried about their electoral prospects, especially after the dismal showing in the European elections. Now, they are very much, as I've said, often seen as a protest vote. So, you know, don't be, shall we say, swayed too much by what happened in the European elections. But what was key, and what we have seen since, is, as usual, is that the Brexit Party, just like UKIP, takes away votes from Conservatives more than it does Labour. The Brexit Party and UKIP have always been a Conservative problem, not a Labour problem. And as shown in the European parliamentary elections, the Brexit Party, where they expected to perform high in Labour voting towns, they didn't perform well. They always performed well in the Tory heartlands, which once again shows that there is still this split in the Tory party. And then, of course, Theresa May resigns and leaves. And we have the leadership contest. And of course, you had, I want to say Ollie Robbins, but it's not, Rory Stewart, who was the only reasonable voice in that room. I disagree with all his policies that he spouts, but he was right in those debates. He was the only one telling the truth about Brexit. And I still maintain to this day, the key winning moment was when he had Rab, and he just literally going, what's the tariff going to be on cheese? And Rab didn't have a comeback to it. And there were many times in that debate where he just hammered home on these people, hammered home on their beliefs. It was reality knocking on the door. And of course, unfortunately, he lost, but it would have been very interesting if it had been him versus Johnson. That would have been very interesting. But eventually, all you were left with was Johnson and Rab. And you had the Tory party membership going, look, we think the only person who can beat Jeremy Corbyn is Johnson. And once again, you have also the polls that came out again showing how hard right the Conservative Party had become, especially in their views and thinking when it came to Brexit. So you have literally 0.25% or 0.3% of the British electorate, where you have children who wouldn't be allowed to vote in a general election, voting to who would replace Theresa May as Prime Minister. And then, of course, Johnson wins. And as we have seen, he's gone through and put in hardlining, far-right Brexiteers into positions of power. He's replaced ministers who, quote, don't believe in Brexit enough, which, you know, goes against everything he has said in the past, that he doesn't want to politicise the civil service. And here we are now. This super hard right group of people who we've talked about just this past week with their book Britannia Unchained. And essentially we've witnessed, enabled by Brexit, a hard right coup into power of these people. Because, let's face it, if these people put forward what I suspect, if you've got the most hardline right-wing government in history, what do you think their manifesto is going to be like? It's obviously going to be the most hardline right-wing conservative manifesto in history. And do you think people are going to vote for it? And as we've already covered again this week, Brexit gives these people the chance to do what they've wanted for years, which is to get rid of regulation, lower taxes, and complete the Thatcherite revolution. Johnson will be Thatcher 2.0. And that's not a pipe dream, it's reality. It's what all the ministers and who have surrounded himself with have been saying for years. Britannia Unchained came out in 2012. So it's quite an old book by this point. And it goes to show that when people are presented with what Johnson would offer, with what Corbyn might offer, there's a very strong chance that he will win. And obviously that's why they had to go. Many Conservatives felt they had to go with Johnson to remain in power. But there you go. And the moderate wing of the Tory party has been shoved out. They are now all on the back benches. But the question remains is, will they be the thorn in Boris's backside like they were to Theresa May? We don't know yet, because once again there's going to be no negotiations. This is the best deal you can get. So you've got to ask yourself a very interesting question, Brexiteers. If Theresa May's deal was the best deal we can get, do you think we're going to get a better deal? The answer is no. So all these people, all these Brexiteers who have been chomping at the bit, saying, we can get a better deal. No, they can't get a better deal. The backstop preserves the Good Friday Agreement, and has been iterated many times in the US. The US will not do a trade deal with us if we break the Good Friday Agreement. So that you're left with two options. Either A, Johnson calls another referendum of Remain versus No Deal. He either holds another general election to try and secure a parliamentary majority so that he can get his no deal through. Or he goes, okay, Northern Ireland, here's an independent referendum. It's the only options he has on the table. And of course, all those come with risks. Because if he calls a referendum, there's a chance he will lose. And all the polls show no one voted for a no deal in 2016. No deal has never won any mass public support. It is not the option MPs want to go with at all in Parliament, so it will not get through Parliament, which then leads us to the next point of, if he calls a general election, which then means he will have to release his manifesto, which then means he will have to set out his future for Britain, which involves all the hard right stuff involved in Britannia Unchained, which we've talked about previously. And again, if he has to stand on that platform, there's a very good chance he will lose, or he will not maintain enough to have a majority in Parliament, which basically means Labour, the SNP, the Lib Dems might all join together in a coalition. And again, Johnson out of power. Or he has to call an independence referendum for Northern Ireland, which he doesn't want to do because he is a very big unionist. And once again, as I said before at the beginning of this video, we have a new Prime Minister, but nothing's changed.